Good morning everybody. Thank you so much for having me here today. I spoke to a number of you 2 years ago at this very event, and I'm very excited to be back here again and sharing some additional research that's happening in your area. And I really need to tell you that I am passionate about science. I love fieldwork. I love collecting data. I love exploring data and discovering new things. And it's really a privilege to be able to share some of the research that's happening in your area by a number of different scientists. Some are here today. And I'm especially passionate about science that tries to solve real-world problems that improve people's lives and our planet. So this work that happens is shorter than the long-term monitoring of the Saldanha Bay Water Quality Forum Trust, and it's really complementary to the work that gets done on a long-term monitoring basis. And I'm really going to try and cover quite a lot of information today, so bear with me, because I wanted to choose a number of science projects that I know people have asked me about, and I wanted to raise awareness about some of these projects that are happening. I wanted to cover some really important topics, such as the rabies outbreak in Cape Fur seals, and a number of other projects. So I have got a lot of information for you today, and I've tried to structure each research project into what the problem is that the scientists are trying to solve, how they went about it, one to three key findings from that research, and then the impact of that work. So I'm going to get right into it and start with 3 science projects that is happening in the seagrass ecosystems and the estuarine lagoon area. All of you know that are from this area that seagrass is one of the most vital ecosystems that we have in the lagoon. It sustains life. Provides nursery areas, habitat, and food for a variety of species that we find here. One of those species is a critically endangered mollusk, or limpet. And this is Siphonaria compressor. And I don't know, hands up anyone who's heard about this limpet or has seen this limpet in the lagoon? Not that many. One person has seen it, all right? So up until now, there were only 2 identified populations of this species in the whole world. The one occurred here in Langebaan and the other one in Knysna Estuary. And the question was whether these were in fact the same species or not. And so the scientists set out to answer this question about how many populations are there of Siphonaria compressor. And they essentially collected a number of different specimens, and they looked at the shape and the size of these, and then they also used DNA to try and distinguish whether they were the same species or not. And what they found was, in fact, that there are 2 different species in Langebaan and in Knysna. So the result is that this little mollusk only occurs in Langebaan Lagoon and nowhere else in the world, which is pretty amazing. But that comes with some consequences. There needs to be management around the species, and for example, if we lose one species here, if we lose the population in Langebaan, there's no other species that can replace that from any other population. And they are heavily reliant on seagrass. They cannot survive without the seagrass. So this work really shows the importance of identifying that this is only one population, but then it needs to go further about, well, now how do we make sure that we conserve this population and it relates to the seagrass? And for those that haven't seen this little mollusk, these are just photographs of the species from Langebaan and the ones from the Knysna Estuary. And essentially, the scientists use these different shapes and sizes and the DNA to distinguish that they are, in fact, 2 different species. So really important work, and it leads right into the next research project, which is around the experimental seagrass restoration that's been happening here in Langebaan. As many of you know that live in Langebaan or live in the area, you would have noticed that seagrass is declining. And that is a concern for us because of the amount of life and diversity that these meadows provide. And so we have scientists being led by the University of Stellenbosch and Cape Town that are trialing ways of trying to restore seagrass in areas that are degraded. So seagrass, Zostera capensis, occurs in a number of different sites along the coastline, and there are many areas where it has disappeared already completely. And we've already seen a decline in the Saldanha Bay area. So they are trying to figure out, well, how can we restore some of those populations that have already disappeared, and in those areas that are heavily degraded, how can we actually try and restore some of that? So what they did was they used a site in Langebaan, in Klein Oosterwal, and they tried different ways of transplanting Zostera capensis in different, using different methods to extract and then plant them. If there's gardeners in the room, you'll know that there's many different techniques that one can try and transplant plants, and they're quite sensitive. And so they use different configurations, they use different methods, and then they monitored how this transplanted seagrass was able to recover and grow in the lagoon. And what they found was that initially, after the first round of transplanting, there would be a dieback of the plant. But after a period of recovery, you would actually see an increase, and in some cases, up to a 400% increase in the patch where that seagrass was recovered. And they found that there was a very specific technique called a core transplant, which was very labor intensive, that was the most successful. So it was the most successful, but it also could potentially have the most impact on when you're trying to collect from donor sites, for example. So they've also been trialing growing the seagrass in laboratory conditions as well. And then also they found that the seagrass plots that they had transplanted and that had grown really successfully attracted a diverse amount of marine life, including the little critically endangered mollusk, Siphoneria compressor. So the impact of this work really shows that restoration is possible, but it is quite complex, and it's going to probably be very case specific. So the experimentation is ongoing, and before one can actually transplant this at scale, there is quite a lot of work that still needs to be done. So one of the core take-home messages as well is, let's try and protect this habitat as much as we can as well, because it is being impacted by a number of human activities. And then the last study that's happening currently in the ecosystem for the seagrass is something that myself and our colleagues from Sandparks were involved with the University of Stellenbosch as well. And one of the scientists from Stellenbosch University was having a nice swim at Kraalbaai in November last year. And she happened to be a specialist on identifying new marine alien species. So alien species are those species that can come from other countries. They can outcompete our indigenous species. They can have negative impacts on our diversity of life. They can have negative impacts on fisheries, on aquaculture and infrastructure. And she happened to have a look at this species, and she thought it looked like a very odd algae, because it is something that looks like algae if you take a look at those pictures on the side there. And she saw this growing from one of the jetty structures at Kraalbaai. And in fact, she sent it to her supervisor and through a picture, and her supervisor said, no, that's algae. But then it was ironic that a couple of weeks later, the supervisor was asked to review a scientific paper from other scientists from around the world on a new species of invertebrate, which is a small colonial animal. It's called a bryozoan, but essentially it's just a tiny little marine creature that lives in colonies. And she went, hang on a second, that looks like that strange algae that my students saw at Kraalbaai. And we then went out and we realized, okay, no, this is not algae, this is potentially this invasive marine species. And in February this year, our team went out and we surveyed 15 different sites across the Langebaan Lagoon, and we tried to understand the distribution and the scale of this new species in the lagoon ecosystem, and we found that over 60% of the area was in fact, had in fact colonies of this little bryozoan, and over 2,000 colonies we recorded over 2 days. And we found it not only growing on these hard structures such as the wreck in the lagoon and under the houseboats and on the jetty structures. We also found huge mats of it on top of the seagrass, and in fact we also found it growing in some of the prawn holes down in areas like Schryvershoek. And then interestingly, we also took samples of that, and we looked at what other animals were associated with this alien species, and we found that there were a number of other alien species that were associating and using this as a home as well. So we really need to monitor what's happening. We show you a picture of it. So the picture on your left is a very large mat of this this bryozoan that has broken off from some of the infrastructure, and it's been deposited onto the lagoon areas, including on the seagrass, and of course it smothers the seagrass like this. And we found a number of very, very big patches like this, and then also we found it actually growing inside some of the prawn holes as well. And the concern is that in other places around the world, this has actually really negatively impacted aquaculture infrastructure. It's negatively impacted seagrass and fisheries as well. We went back in winter to sample again, and interestingly, we didn't find any colonies. And so our theory is that the colder water in winter caused a dieback. And so the next step for us now is to sample again in summer to see if it grows back and how quickly. So ongoing work that's happening in this space. The next research project I'm going to talk about revolves around the fish. The last talk I gave 2 years ago, I really took you on an underwater excursion and showed you some of the underwater videos that we're using to look at the diversity and the abundance of fish in the area. We all know that Langebaan and Saldanha Bay are really vital areas for nurseries for a range of important fish species. It provides critical habitat for these species, and there's also a lot of pressure on these species. So it's really important for us to monitor. So I'm just going to give you a quick update on the baited remote underwater video work that we are doing. Again, this complements the existing research that's happening from the State of the Bay monitoring, and we use a non-invasive process to monitor the species. So many of the important species are showing declines, and we really want to better understand what the status of those species are across different environments, but then also across the different zones of the marine protected area. So when we look at the sanctuary zone versus the restricted zone versus the controlled zone, when harvesting and no harvesting is allowed. And essentially, over the last couple of years, we've deployed over 200 of these baited remote underwater videos across all habitats and across all marine zones. And we've recorded 19 species, including really key species like white stumpnose, alf, blacktail, a couple of really interesting skates and sharks in the area as well. And we found that in summer, which supports previous research, we found much greater diversity and abundance of species when the water is warmer in summer. And then we also found so far that Zone C, which is the sanctuary zone where no fishing is allowed, that there is the greatest abundance and diversity of fish in these areas, especially the juveniles. So again, highlighting the importance of these different areas in the lagoon. And we really hope that this information can feed into helping to guide management in the future and sustainable use into the future for these species. And something that really is new with our research is that we have upgraded our equipment to be able to also look at the size of fish. So these cameras, we use a dual set of cameras that are in tandem essentially, and then we use special software which allows us to use stereo to estimate the size of the fish. So we did our first surveys in February this year using this new system, and we can't wait to start measuring the fish now as well. So in addition to the biodiversity and the abundance, we can now also look at sizes and how those differ across the lagoon. And of course, I can't not show one of our videos. And so this is going to show you just a brief little video of what the data looks like. But of course, you can imagine that we get hours and hours and hours of data that need to be processed. And I have an amazing team that's sitting here that goes through like hundreds of hours of video footage to process the videos and help us understand what's going on. Some fish really like the attention. They tend to go for the camera, much like some of us, I think. And in that video, you'll see there's rock lobster, there's gobies, there's juvenile fish, there's stinkies, there's clipfish, there's all kinds of things. And it's really incredible to see the life under the water, because often not many of us get to see that, right? And so we really love going through the videos and being able to see that. The next thing I'm going to talk about is the work around the rabies outbreak at Cape Fur seals. I know there's many questions around Cape Fur seals. I know that there have been previous talks around the Cape Fur seal population and the distribution, so I'm not going to cover those today. At tea time, you're welcome to ask me, or after the talk, you can ask me a little bit more about that. But essentially, in a nutshell, the Cape Fur seal population on a whole is stable. So there's about 2 million seals along our coastline, so that's quite a lot of seals. The population itself does not seem to have increased or decreased over the last few years. But what seems to have changed is the distribution of these animals, essentially where they are along the coast. And so you might see these localized, what seems to be increases in terms of numbers, and that's a distributional shift that's happening because of environmental conditions and because of food availability conditions and so forth. So there's a general move from the north down to the south of many top predators, including Cape Fur seals, including penguins, including gannets. And it's this ecosystem, the Benguela ecosystem, that is undergoing major changes at the moment that is part of that. But what I'm going to be talking about today is really around the recent rabies outbreak. Who's heard about the recent rabies outbreak? I thought so. So I thought it would be a really good idea to just tell you what the latest information is around this. So initially, a couple of years ago, there have been reports of this unusual aggression of Cape Fur seals towards people. And and there were many theories put forward for this: habituation, lack of food, poisoning from eating poisoned fish and algae through the food chain. But because nobody thought that seals could get rabies, there wasn't a lot of testing that was done for rabies, because the veterinary scientists did not think that Cape fur seals and other marine mammals got rabies. And so it was only earlier in this year, when one seal bit 6 surfers in Muizenberg, that the animal was tested for rabies, and it came back positive. And this set off a chain reaction. And so since then, a lot more testing has been done. So rabies was confirmed for the first time in Cape fur seals in June this year. And in fact, it's only the second recorded time in history in the world that a marine mammal has got rabies. And so far, 29 confirmed cases have occurred. That map shows you the distribution of those cases, all the way from the Northern Cape into the Eastern Cape. So far, we have not picked up anything in KZN, but it's not an area where you get a lot of Cape fur seals. So that's not surprising. And then what's happened is there have been many researchers that have been trying to solve this problem about these unusually aggressive seals, and some mass die-offs that's happened. And they essentially had samples that were able to be back-tested, and the earliest confirmed case of rabies was from August 2022. So it's been around for a couple of years, we just didn't know about it. And so one of the most recent findings through some genetic analysis that's happening is that there seems to be a single source of rabies infection, which possibly could have come from black-backed jackal interacting with Cape fur seals in Namibia. So along our west coast and up into Namibia, the biggest seal colonies occur on land, and there's a lot of interaction between land mammals and seals in that area. And that's what the evidence at the moment is suggesting. And so there's a lot that had to be immobilized very, very quickly, and it's still a work in progress, which is one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you about it today, is communication around this issue. And so there's a lot of ongoing testing. There's a lot of management around safety of people, and then also surveillance and euthanasia of those rabies suspect seals as well. So there's a case definition for rabies in seals that's been built up, and if a seal meets that, then the authorities will prioritize the safety of humans and euthanize that seal. So there's really some key messages around this. Is first thing, avoid interacting with seals. They really are wild animals, but some people like to get up really close, try and take a selfie. It happens all the time. You don't think it happens, but there are reports daily of people trying to get close to these seals. And so really avoid interacting with them. If one is bitten or scratched or licked, the first thing you need to do is use soapy water for 10 minutes and try and wash that wound out very, very quickly, and then seek medical attention. You need to report any aggressive seal behavior, and this is to the state veterinary office needs to know, but in this area you can also contact sandparks and the municipality. And then also dogs. It's also been shown in Cape Town that one of the seals that had rabies passed it on to a pet dog, and that dog then had to be put down. So keep your dogs and your pets on leashes if you're at the beach, and then also try and fully vaccinate your pets against rabies every 3 years. So I'm going to move on to some of the seabird work that's being done. There's a lot of seabird work that's being done. Our islands are incredible places for endangered species like the Cape gannets, the Cape cormorants, some African penguins that are still around, and many, many other seabirds as well. They offer the breeding sites for the birds, and there's been some really interesting work. The first work I'm going to tell you about is also around disease and disease management. This is around the bird flu outbreak that occurred. Who knew about the bird flu outbreak? A couple of people. So avian influenza or bird flu, again, is one of the more recent viruses that has affected our coastal seabirds. And a few years ago, Langebaan itself was hit pretty hard, particularly with our terns. I think our park team had to deal with over 5,000 dead terns in one go. Bird flu just, once the bird is infected, its chances of survival are very low. And we then also had to immobilize all the stakeholders, all the authorities very, very quickly, because Langebaan was just one site where this had broken out. And as you can see in this map, which is a bit of a heat map, where the red spots are, these were hot spots where we had mass mortality of certain species, but then we also had this occurrence all along the coast, with the south coast being primarily hit hard as well. And this included your African penguins, your gannets, and your cormorants and your terns as well. So it affected 15 different coastal seabirds. And it's something that has occurred again, and we have learned very valuable lessons around what to do, how to minimize the impact, and the research highlighted these resource gaps and the needs going forward. And it's, again, a work in progress to be better prepared for the next outbreak to try and minimize the impact on our endangered and threatened seabirds. This one is a study that I wasn't even aware about. So when I was looking at the research over the last 2 to 3 years, which is what I've presented today, I found this really interesting study. And it's really about some of the social interactions of Cape Gannet. So if many of you have visited any of the Cape Gannet colonies here in the West Coast, you'll see that when the birds come back from their foraging trips and they get back to the nest, they do like a little dance. And I have my backup dancers here that were prepared to do a bit of a dance. No, they're putting their heads down. Okay, so no backup dancing happening today. So the scientists really asked, well, these birds are feeding on such a large scale. How do they share information? How do they share information about where the fish are? And so what they did was scientists can be very innovative sometimes. They put little GPS trackers on a number of gannets, and they also had little video cameras by the nests of these birds. So Cape Gannets are monogamous, so they form bonds that they keep. And so they can keep track on certain gannet couples. Scientists can also be a little bit perverted sometimes. So, and then what they wanted to do is they wanted to try and relate this little dance, the ceremonial dance that happens when one of the mates gets back to the nest, and relate that to the GPS tracking data. And they found 14 different dance moves. And they found that specific dance behaviors did correlate with the GPS tracking data. So essentially, that dance is communicating about where the food is. Incredible, right? Yeah, I thought it was pretty amazing. So it really highlights these social behaviors and how these birds might be sharing information about where the food is. And just to show you, these are the tracks of those Cape Gannets from Malchus Island. Look how far they're traveling to find food, all the way down to Cape Point. I found this absolutely incredible. And then they come back and they do a dance. They still have energy to do a dance and explain where the food is to their mates. Incredible. I'm gonna be ending off now, and I really just wanted to say that, a lot of people often ask us, where can we get more information about the science? Where can we get more information about the monitoring? This is one of the areas, this open day, which I find absolutely phenomenal of this organization to hold. But we also try and put a lot of our information on our website. You can read a lot about our research and the work of our collaborators through our research reports. We make them available online. We try and put them into bite-sized stories. So we've got a page called Our Stories, and we try and put blogs on there. So if you want more information, that's one of the areas you can. And then I'm going to end off with this. Somewhere, something incredible is waiting to be known. And each one of you can be a scientist and contribute to science. And I want to encourage you to do that, because it really is something that we need to get a lot more of and a lot more understanding. We can only target some questions and one area or a couple of areas, but with a mass of people collecting information, which is made easy by if you've got a phone, you can be a citizen scientist. So iNaturalist, please come and talk to me about it. iNaturalist, you can download, it's free. You can take photos of anything that you see of interest. It's like social media, but for science. It's awesome. So I want to encourage you to be a citizen scientist today. Thank you.